Kicking off at number 5. Finland. And no, not the Scandinavian nation of Finland, although that awesome country has as much deeply seated history as the best of them. This story is about a much more different destination. You see, the Vikings were remarkable explorers, and the art of experiencing the unknown parts of the planet was perhaps one of the most important figures in Viking society. So then, it would make sense that the Vikings managed to make landfall in North America nearly 500 years before Christopher Columbus was even born, right? In fact, it is widely considered that the legendary Viking explorer Leif Erikson led the first ever European voyage to touch North American soil. You see, by the year 985 AD, Greenland had been relatively settled by Leif's father, Eric the Red, who had been banished from Norway for committing manslaughter. Leif grew up with a thirst for exploration, and it was around 1000 AD that he turned his sights towards the mystery of the West. After crossing the rest of the Atlantic, he discovered what is now Canada, a rocky and barren land which could have been Baffin Island, but the Vikings dubbed it Helluland, Norwegian for stone slab land. Eventually, when they got further inland, they discovered a much more lush and bountiful region filled with salmon and wild grapes that they named Vinland, Wineland. They spent a winter or so here before returning home, telling everyone how awesome it was. Now, because of that, several parties tried to sail there and settle permanently, the most famous of which being a site at the northernmost tip of Newfoundland at L'Anse aux Meadows, where archaeologists have discovered numerous evidence of their settlement. You see, after all of this exploration, though, the Vikings hadn't paid much attention to the natives that had lived there for thousands of years already. First, Leif's brother Thorwald Eriksson was killed in a skirmish with a nearby native tribe, and then several years later, another group of Vikings were mercilessly killed in the Battle of Vinland in the year 1010. As an old legend goes, the final nail in the coffin for the Vikings' time in North America came when a small group of fishermen woke up in their coastal camp, only to find that their leader had been beheaded in the night by the natives, his head skewered on a stake as a warning never to return. Swinging in at number 4, the Death of Hingus. Now, whilst there are many legendary Danish kings from history, the majority of them are renowned for their lives as bloodthirsty warriors and daring tacticians. Hingus, though, this guy is far more renowned for his death, more so than anything else. Although, to give him credit, he was a pretty legendary warrior and leader either way. It's just that, well, you'll find out. From the off, Hingus was thrust into a life of violent circumstance. His father, King Gram of Denmark, rocked up to the wedding of a Finnish princess, Signe, and her intended husband, Henry, King of Saxony. Obviously, it was love at first sight, as Gram killed Henry on the spot and then took Signe back to Denmark, where she eventually gave birth to their son, Hingus. Obviously, Gram had quite a few enemies at this point and was quickly killed in turn, but Hingus was smuggled out in secret to Sweden, where he was fostered by a giant, Wagnofthus, and his daughter, Harthgreppa. Now, this is where the story turns up a notch. You see, all Hingus wanted to be was a warrior, but the giant Harthgreppa had other desires. Despite being his wet nurse, she eventually seduced him in his adolescence and became his lover. When he came of age, Hingus decided to head back to Denmark, and the giantess, of course, came with him. On the way, they spent a night in a house whose inhabitants had just died, but as Harthgreppa was a sorceress, she cast a spell that caused one of the corpses to speak. Well, that corpse wasn't too happy and cursed them for eternity, telling them both how they would die. Not long afterward, Harthgreppa's death came true. She was torn to pieces by her fellow giants in a bloodthirsty frenzy. Hingus went on in silence, though, and became the legendary king that he was worthy of being. His death he kept secret, seeking wisdom from his new patron, Odin. Eventually, after partaking in some mythical acts and winning countless wars until his old age, he brought his subjects to a forest to witness his new revelation. He claimed that only Odin knew his death, and then he hung himself in front of everyone. Next up at number 3, Yuya and Yemen. And of course, it can't be a list without ancient Japanese history unless there's a good old-fashioned ghost story involved. And this one is perhaps the most legendary of them all. A tale of betrayal, murder, and ghostly revenge, adapted over 30 times in Japanese history and cinema, and one of the underlying tales that forms the very unique aspect of Japanese horror to this day. Yotsuya Kaiden, but more specifically, the story of Yuya and Tamiyan Yemen. As the legend goes, Yuya was a charming young woman who lived in a small town in Japan alongside her lover, Yemen, and although the pair were poor and had little money, they loved each other very much. Eventually they married, they had a child, and they were content in their standing in life. However, as time went on, the young Yemen became angry and depressed, surrounded by his reminder of his failures and his lack of prospects. Soon, he grew to hate Yuya and instead began an affair with a rich young woman by the name of Yume. As time passed, at the prospect of marrying into Yume's family for the wealth and riches, Yemen plotted to secretly poison his own wife. One night over dinner, after he poisoned his wife's wife's food, Yuya pleaded with him to tell her what was wrong. The pair argued until late in the evening, and then, dejected and confused, Yuya eventually consumed the poison, and Yemen watched as it slowly did its job. However, it didn't work as intended, and instead of killing her, it grossly disfigured Yuya, contorting her into a shadow of her former self. Yemen was too much of a coward to finish the job, and Yuya lived in pain and torment. And then, one evening, after taking his wife for a walk, he pushed her off a cliff when he realised that no one was around to notice. In public, he played the part of the victim, spending all of his money on a marital and pious funeral, knowing that his money troubles would soon be a thing of the past. While eventually on his wedding day to the wealthy Yume, when Yemen lifted the veil of his new bride, instead he saw his ex-wife's contorted and twisted face poisoned by his own hand. It screamed betrayal at him, and in a panic Yemen drew his sword and swung at the ghostly apparition. And then a severed head collapsed and rolled across the floor of the wedding ceremony, but it wasn't his ghostly ex-wife's head, but instead the head of his new bride. Coming in at number 2, Lindisfarne. Alright, okay, less mythology now and more actual historic atrocity. Lindisfarne in many ways is perhaps the most important date on the Viking calendar. In more ways than one, it was the birth of the Viking Age. It was the precursor to the many times that these Danish, Norwegian and Swedish warriors would step foot on the shores of Britain, or, well, not quite Britain just yet. Not the mainland anyway. You see, the holy island of Lindisfarne is a tidal island just off of the northeast coast of England in Northumberland. Here it was the site of an incredibly important church in pagan Christianity. It was a peaceful and quiet place dedicated to the production of scripture by its humble monastery. In the year 793 it was said that several months before, foreboding omens came over the land of Northumbria. Whirlwinds far at sea, lightning cracking from beyond the waves, and fiery dragons seen flying in the sky. These signs were followed by a great famine, and then on the 8th of June the Vikings emerged from the mist. As a Northumbrian scholar of Charlemagne's court wrote, "Never before has such terror appeared in Britain as we have now suffered from a pagan race. The heathens poured out the blood of saints around the altar and trampled on the bodies of saints in the temple of God, like dung in the streets." You see, the English didn't know what had hit them. The Vikings had perfected the art of shipbuilding and navigation, and they had sailed to a land that they suspected would be filled with riches and resources ripe for the picking. And when they first emerged at Lindisfarne, where the only opposition was holy men in robes, it was like a hot knife through butter. The massacre at Lindisfarne was unprecedented, and in many ways it had only served to further the Vikings' bloody reputation for centuries to come. It sent shockwaves to the rest of Europe, but as history teaches us, that wasn't the last of it. The slaughter at Lindisfarne ushered in a newfound frequency of Viking raids across the coast, as well as in Ireland and France, carving out a brand new period in Britain's bloody history. And finally, coming in at number 1 spot, the Blood Eagle. Alright, talking of bloody history, our final entry on this list has to be perhaps the most notorious claim in Viking history. Throughout the many sagas of the Viking Age, one term struck more fear into the hearts of those that opposed the Danelaw than anything else. Now, it's also important to note that the so-called Blood Eagle, much like with many things of Norse legend, is possibly as much a fact as it is in fiction. In fact, many historians regard this particular torture method as being so bloodthirsty and grisly that it probably never even happened, but was instead used as a cultural myth to strike fear into the hearts of the Vikings' enemies. I mean, that's also not to say that there are any several historical accounts, because there are, but yeah, just take this one with a pinch of salt. As the saga of Ragnar Lothbrok explains, Jarl Ynar went to Halfdan and carved Blood Eagle on his back. He thrust a sword into his trunk by the backbone and cut all the ribs away, from the backbone down to the loins, and drew the lungs out there. Yeah, that's a pretty bold statement. You see, one of the earliest accounts of the use of the Blood Eagle is attributed to the death of Ragnar Lothbrok himself. Back in 865, King Yala, who was the then king of Northumbria, had finally captured the legendary Viking leader Ragnar Lothbrok and sentenced him to death by throwing him into a pit of deadly snakes. And before anyone says that the United Kingdom doesn't have any deadly snakes, yes we do. It's the adder, and they're incredibly poisonous. Anyway, in revenge for his death, the sons of Ragnar, led by Ivar the Boneless, led a Viking invasion a year or so later with King Jarl in their sights. And once they finally found him following the Battle of York in 867, Viking legend maintains that Jarl was tortured to death by each of Ragnar's sons by method of the Blood Eagle, where he was kept alive during the grisly and bloodthirsty punishment. You see, whether true or not, Jarl was not the only one to have allegedly succumbed to the Blood Eagle, as many other figures throughout the sagas met the same grim fate. Either it was the most painful and vile punishment imaginable, or it was the scariest story ever told in ancient Nordic history. Either way, it worked. Kicking off at number 5, the Minotaur. And the fact that this horrifying creation is chasing up the rear at number 5 should say something about the ferocity of this list. You see, the Minotaur, for all intents and purposes, whilst being an icon of folklore and mythology, is also a creature of such pain, torment and revulsion that it was actually pretty hard to stomach, comparable to many other Greek legends. It's one that has found its way into the fold of many interlocking myths, a grotesque abomination that possessed the body of a man and the head of a bull, captured and confined to his labyrinthine prison on the island of Crete. In many ways, the Minotaur is the embodiment of all of the harrowing themes so often found in Greek mythology: pity, rage, unbridled cruelty, disobeying the gods, the penance of breaking cultural and societal taboos. And on that note, yeah, we should probably explain just how the Minotaur got its bull-headed head. I'm not too sure who to feel sorry for, actually, but maybe make your own minds up about that. As the legend goes, King Minos, before his time as the ruler of Crete, competed with his brothers for the throne of the island. In desperation, Minos prayed to Poseidon, the god of the sea, to send him a snow-white bull as a sign of his support. Poseidon did so under the sole condition that he was to kill the bull to show his honor to the deity, but instead Minos kept it because of its great beauty. To punish him, Poseidon made Pasiphae, Minos' wife, fall deeply in love with the bull. Through some strange manner of craftsmanship, she eventually mated with the snow-white bull, and thus she birthed the Minotaur. At first she nursed him as a mother, but he quickly grew ferocious and began eating small children before working his way up to fully sized adults. Eventually the Minotaur had caused so much cannibalistic chaos that King Minos commissioned Daedalus, the father of Icarus, to construct an impossible labyrinth to contain the Minotaur, and eventually it was engineered near the palace of Knossos. To appease the savage Minotaur, and later to appease King Minos for the death of his son Androgeus, the city of Athens were bound to send 7 young men and 7 young maidens to be released into the labyrinth and feasted upon by the beast every year, until eventually it was slain by the hero Theseus. And yeah, guys, this is just the introduction. Swinging in at number 4, the Chimera, which, whilst being a word I just love to say, also I love saying chimeric. The Chimera of ancient Greek mythology deserves its place on this list for its influence alone. Although on the surface the Chimera may seem like a hodgepodge of things that don't ever quite mesh for the unbridled horror that we expect, this terrifying monster is far more than the sum of its parts. First appearing in the Iliad, penned by the legendary Homer himself, the Chimera was initially described as a thing of immortal make, not human, lion-fronted and snake behind, a goat in the middle, and snorting out the breath of the terrible flame of bright fire. A ferocious fire-breathing monstrosity, the Chimera was traditionally considered to have been a female creature, one that had given birth to both the Sphinx and the Nemean lion of antiquity. It is a monster that was greatly feared by the ancient Greeks, and it would appear as an omen to many, heralding storms, shipwrecks and natural disasters. The Chimera is perhaps best known for its part in the legend of Bellerophon, the hero of the city of Corinth, who was ordered by the king of Lycia to slay the beast in penance for his past sins. Knowing that he would need assistance for such a mighty task, Bellerophon prayed and slept in the temple of Athena, urging the goddess of wisdom to bestow upon him a blessing fit for a hero. Upon waking, Bellerophon was led by the hand by the goddess to the mythical horse Pegasus, a divine creature that possessed the power of flight, because, well, how do you defeat a fire-breathing lion with a poison venomous snake tail? Well, a giant flying horse, of course. And if you want to know where that particular horse came from, hold your horses, because we'll get to that. Eventually, Bellerophon attacked the creature from the air, impaling its mouth with a spear of pure lead that melted just as the Chimera breathed its fire on it, smelting the ore to its face and then suffocating it to death. And that's the end of the Chimera, really? Or is it? Yeah, it is. Next up at number 3, the Hydra. And of course, because I just bet you guys were expecting this particular many-headed monster to rear all of its head towards us, actually. In fact, in many ways, the Hydra is perhaps one of the most iconic creatures in the whole of Greek mythology, and if anything, it's certainly the poster child of the many-headed mantra of evil. And if you're expecting a Hail Hydra joke, please, you know better than that. The Lindan Hydra, or more simply known as the Hydra, is a serpentine water monster that finds its crossover in both Greek and Roman mythology. According to the poet Hesiod, the serpentine Hydra was said to possess poisonous breath and blood so virulent that even breathing in the miasma that it exuded was deadly enough. The Hydra possessed many heads, the exact number of which varies from source to source, and in some texts were actually infinite. You see, in some stories, the Hydra was a creature of great regeneration, and whichever head was cut from its body, 2 more would grow back in its place. Interestingly enough, many parallels of the same creature appear in Sumerian, Babylonian, and Assyrian mythologies, but the most iconic of them all occurs in the infamous Greek legend, the 12 Labours of Heracles, which, side note, is a hella messed up legend to begin with, down to the fact that after being driven mad by Hera, Heracles killed his son, daughter, and his own wife, Megara. Yeah, Disney. You missed that bit out, didn't ya? You see, hoping for some kind of penance, Heracles undertook the 12 labours as a feat of near certain death, and the Hydra just so happened to be his second pit stop in that struggle. Before attacking the Hydra, Heracles covered his mouth and nose with a cloth to avoid the deadly toxins, and after realising that trying to hack off each head was a hopeless task, he took to cauterising each head one by one with a flaming torch. Well, I suppose if you're going to repent for murdering your own family, that's one way to do it. Coming in at number 2, the Gorgens. Of course, it just had to be. And in fear of us all turning into stone, I would recommend squinting for this particular segment. Seriously. Don't say I didn't warn you. Now, whilst the mythical race of Gorgens are incredibly prolific throughout ancient Greek mythology, of course, the most iconic of them all is Medusa. Don't get too ahead of your snake hair though, because we'll get to her shortly, and there's actually much more to it than just a villainous, stone-gazing monster. You see, whilst the description of Gorgens vary from text to text, they were said to have been birthed by the union of Phorcys, the sea god who often appeared as a crab, and Ceto, the sea goddess and mother of monsters. Gorgens were depicted as having wings, brazen claws, the tusks of boars, and stone skin. Now, although the Gorgon will later become an image of great power and protection, in early antiquity they were the OGs of horrifying evil. And yeah, by OG I do mean original Gorgon. To get to their later depiction though, of course, we have to tell the tale of the most famous Gorgon, Medusa, and the hero Perseus. As the legend tells it, Medusa was born of the Gorgons with a hideous face and a serpent's tail where her leg should have been. She was said to have been the only one of the 3 remaining Gorgons that was not immortal. And so King Polydictus dispatched Perseus in the hope of distracting him long enough for him to seduce his mother. What a jerk. Anyway, armed with a scythe and a mirrored shield gifted to him by Athena in lieu of being turned into stone by gazing at her, Perseus managed to use the reflection of the shield to safely cut off Medusa's head, and as the vile stream of blood spouted from her neck and fell into the sea, the winged horse Pegasus was born. Hey, told you we'd get to the Pegasus' origin story, right? The thing is though, after this whole debacle, Perseus attached Medusa's head to his shield and used it to kick some and take some names on his way home before giving it back to Athena as a gift, who then took it as her symbol and placed it on her shield. Greek mythology, guys, it's allegorical. I promise. I think. And finally, coming in at number 1 spot, Typhon. And it just has to be really, because for a pantheon of terrifying creatures of mythology, the one that gave birth to pretty much all of them has to take the top spot. Typhon is the father of all monsters. He was birthed from the Titan union of Gaia and Tartarus and was said to have been the most ferocious creature that has ever roamed the earth. Typhon was impossibly large, and it was said that when he stood upright, his head would brush against the stars. The lower half of his body consisted of the tails of 2 coiled vipers that would hiss and spit venom at his foes, and from his fingers several dragons' heads would erupt and spit flames beneath him. Typhon was said to have wings so large that when spread they would blot out the sun. Fire would spill from his eyes like molten lava, and it was said that whoever gazed upon him would perish in fear, even the mighty Olympians. And yes, that included even the mightiest of all the Olympians, Zeus himself. You see, Typhon was such a terrifying and powerful entity that the only conceivable opponent to defy him was Zeus himself. At the dawn of all things, whilst the other Olympians trembled and fled in fear, Zeus stood his ground against this monstrous being, resulted in a great battle where countless earthquakes and devastating tsunamis raged across the planet. In fact, as Greek mythology makes pretty clear, the war that raged between Zeus and Typhon was so mighty that it threatened to break the planet clean in 2. Eventually, Zeus managed to gain the upper hand, and he triumphed over Typhon by firing 100 thunderbolts to the head of the monster, casting him back down into the pits of Tartarus, where he was sealed away for all time. Yet, even the pits of Tartarus aren't enough to fully contain the rage of Typhon, and whilst he remains trapped beneath the earth, the fits of anger that he experiences manifest themselves in the form of volcanic eruptions and earthquakes. And what more can we say? Greek mythology, again, it's allegorical, I promise. Kicking off at number 5, the Divine Wind. And this one in particular is such a tale of historical significance that we just have to talk about it purely from an etymological perspective. Because you know that we all love words, right? Well, for those of you that do know, the term kamikaze actually translates to divine wind in Japanese, which is pretty metal anyway, but the actual reason behind that is something else entirely. Now, over in the rich and intricate history of Asia, the Mongol Empire are a pretty big deal, although they are more inexplicably tied to the ancient kingdom of China than ancient Japan. However, that is not to say that the Japanese didn't have their own Mongol horde to face down. It's just, well, something incredibly interesting happened, and not only once, but twice. Let me explain. In 1274, Kublai Khan of the Mongol Empire sent a massive navy to conquer Japan with an estimated 30,000 to 40,000 men made up of Chinese and Korean warriors, as well as the highly feared Mongol troops. The navy set off in the autumn of that year, harrying the northern coastal islands of Kyushu. However, once the main fleet arrived and began to anchor in Hataka Bay, as the legend goes, shows a force of nature struck. A divine wind, a huge typhoon, emerged from the depths of the ocean, sinking a third of the Mongol fleet and sending the rest of them home. It was certainly a force of nature, and it saved the Japanese ultimately from ruin. But the same thing happened again, to everyone's divine amazement. Not happy with his failure, Kublai Khan sent a second fleet several years later in 1281, comprised of over 4,500 vessels and some 140,000 men. Again, sailing in August, the fleet made the once familiar voyage toward Japan, and again, this time, the divine wind struck once more. I mean, obviously there is a pinch of salt needed to this, as is the formation of a Japanese legend, but the symbology alone is startling. Again, the fleet was devastated by a far more powerful typhoon than the last, and over half of the invading force was cast into the bay, perishing in the violent waters of the Pacific. The divine wind, which once again, as the legend tells it, saved Japan from the Mongol Empire. However, there is a caveat to this story. During their time preparing for the second Mongol invasion, a 20-kilometer wall was ordered to be constructed as a means of defense. Despite holding off the Mongol Empire down to the divine act of the wind, the construction of this wall absolutely crippled the kingdom economically, ultimately leading to the shogunate's downfall. Maybe there's a lesson there. Coming in at number 4, Yasuke. And I'm gonna be honest guys, this one is so awesome, and why there hasn't been a movie made about it yet is anyone's guess. But hold that thought, because actually, as of this year, rumours have stirred that a one Chadwick Boseman, aka the Black Panther himself, will be playing the first African samurai in history. Really, the epic tale of Yasuke, whilst being a startling reminder of the time, is also one of the most incredible moments in history, and it is a story that just needs to be told. You see, in 1579, a Jesuit missionary by the name of Alessandro bought an African slave of unknown origin with him on his travels to Japan. Now, historical records aren't exactly clear as to where he was born, but it has been proposed that he may have been from Mozambique, Angola, Ethiopia, or perhaps even Portugal. His real name too is not known, but as far as Japanese records are concerned, they called him Yasuke, believed to be a phonetic approximation of his real name, which was possibly Yasufe or Isaac. Whilst on their travels through the kingdom, Yasuke was eventually called to an audience with Oda Nobunaga, the most powerful Japanese warlord of the time, who was captivated by Yasuke's strength and size, and was so awestruck by this figure from a foreign land that he made him his personal retainer and bodyguard. And well, from then on, Yasuke pretty much pursued the path of the warrior in Japanese society, and he was pretty damn good at it, eventually learning the language and often speaking fluently with the warlord as a trusted counsel. In 1581, Yasuke was elevated to the rank of samurai and stationed at Nobunaga's stronghold and crowning glory, Azuchi Castle, where he served by his side as his personal sword bearer. Eventually, when Nobunaga was later betrayed by Akechi Mitsuhide and his army, a huge battle erupted at Honnoji in Kyoto, where Yasuke stood side by side with the samurai warriors, willing to fight to the death. Sadly, they were defeated, and after, Nobunaga was forced to commit seppuku, ceremonial suicide. Yasuke escaped, however, and briefly served under Nobunaga's son, until he too was attacked by Mitsuhide and committed suicide. Eventually, Yasuke surrendered his sword to the pursuing warlord, and unaccustomed to a samurai surrendering rather than ceremonial seppuku, he ordered Yasuke to return to the Jesuit mission in Kyoto. After that, Yasuke's fate is unclear. He seemingly faded back into the sands of time, where only his legend remained. And hopefully an awesome movie. Next up at number 3, The Curse of Andvari's Ring. And for this one, we're going to dip a little into Norse mythology, because let's face it, the history of the Scandinavian people was shaped by these skaldic tales that they formed their culture upon. And what if I also told you that The Curse of Andvari's Ring is also one of the many inspirations of none other than J.R.R. Tolkien's The Lord of the Rings? Yeah. Curse Ring, Lord of the Rings. Alright, okay, maybe you saw that one coming. But still, in the original legend, one that is scarcely told but is integral to the Volsunga saga, the story focuses on the eponymous ring Andvaranut, or Andvari's gift, a fabled item that had the ability to make gold. Its creator, Andvari, which is Old Norse for careful one, was a dwarf that lived beneath a waterfall who had the primal power to transform himself into a fish at will. Using the power of the ring, Andvari stockpiled great wealth, but it drew the jealousy of the trickster god himself, Loki. You see, being the resourceful type that he was, Loki used a charm net to capture Andvari whilst he was transformed in a fish, and on condition of letting him go, he demanded the ring and his hoard of gold with it. You see, whilst Andvari reluctantly agreed, he also cursed the ring so that misfortune and peril would befall whosoever possessed it. And that's where the real bulk of this tale begins, because as so far as misfortune goes in Norse mythology, Andvari's ring is chasing the heels of Ragnarok in terms of individuals affected. First, Loki passed on the cursed ring to Hreimdar, king of the dwarves, for accidentally killing his son when he was transformed into an otter. Yeah, dwarves and transforming into animals is a pretty key motif here. Hreindmar was quickly hit by misfortune though when his own son, Fafnir, killed him and stole the ring, where he fled to the mountains, transformed into a fiery and fearsome dragon to protect his hoard of gold. Where have we heard that one before? Fafnir didn't last long though, because soon enough the great hero Sigurd hunted down and killed Fafnir the dragon, taking his ring with him, who he gave to his beloved Brynhilda, the Shield Maiden, and Valkyrie, where the both of them spent years befallen with tragedy after tragedy. Eventually, Queen Grimhild of the dwarves tricked the couple into marrying into her own family, therefore bringing the curse of the ring full circle. Yeah, exactly. Rock and pool is nice and cool, our only wish to catch a fish. Makes a bit more sense now, right? Coming in at number 2, The Standing Death of Benkei. Which, come on, you know what I'm going to say, right? That's a pretty awesome title for a death metal album. Just saying guys, another one to add to the pile. But really, the unbelievable tale of the standing death of Benkei is just as awesome as it sounds. Between 1180 and 1185, a series of bloodthirsty and complex battles were fought in Japan, a period of history known as the Genpei War. Now, during this time, many lives were lost, but a legendary hero of Japanese folklore emerged. Minamoto no Yoshitsune, the renowned warrior that defeated the Hydra clans. But this story isn't so much concerned with Yoshitsune, but instead his most loyal of followers. Mushishibo Benkei, a man of mysterious birth who lived his life first as a monk, then a mountain hermit, and eventually the most badass warrior to have ever lived. He was one of the few men who would eventually earn the respect of Yoshitsune, and he did that by being an all-around unrelenting badass, really. But it's not exactly in his life where Benkei achieved immortality, but instead in his death. Eventually, after the Genpei War had been settled for many years, history of course decided to repeat itself, and the same echoes of betrayal stirred throughout the warring clans of Japan. After falling out of favour with his half-brother, Yoshitsune retreated and sought refuge with the powerful northern Fujiwara clan for several years. By 1187 though, the patron of the Fujiwara clan had passed away of old age, and Yoshitsune's half-brother forced the clan into succumbing to his will. Eventually his residence was surrounded by an impossibly large army, and yet one man stood in their way. Benkei, the final loyal warrior and follower of Yoshitsune, who guarded the one bridge that lay between his leader and the bloodthirsty army. It is said that during the battle, Benkei defeated more than 300 warriors single-handedly, allowing time for his leader to commit seppuku in his residence. Witnessing the unbridled bloodbath, the opposing force were terrified to approach, and instead began firing from a distance with a volley of arrows. One by one, arrow after arrow punctured Benkei, but still he didn't fall. As the legend goes, after the terrified army finally worked up the courage to come near him, they had found that Benkei had died from his many arrow wounds. Yet, he had died standing on his feet. And finally, coming in at number 1 spot, the 47 Ronin. And if you thought that the story of Benkei couldn't be topped, of course it can, because come on, this is Japan. Now I don't say this lightly, but the legend of the 47 Ronin is perhaps one of the most important stories in Japanese culture, and certainly the most definitive of what it means to be a samurai. It exemplifies many traits that have been carved out of the thousands of years of Japanese history, and of course, as is the case with many important cultural tales, it has been adapted hundreds of times in both literature and cinema to varying degrees of success. And yes, I'm looking at you, Keanu Reeves. In the year 1701, the daimyo of the Eiko domain, which was a sort of warlord, was a warrior named Asano Naganori, a legendary samurai who inspired his host of loyal samurais for many years, leading a group of over 300 men, all of them formidable warriors in ancient Japan. Now, during one trip to Edo, which is now Tokyo, Asano butted heads with a particularly corrupt and generally unlikable protocol master, a man named Kira Yoshinaka, who was accustomed to making people bend over backwards for him, despite the cultural importance of hospitality in Japan. You see, this kind of stuff just didn't fly with Asano, and after putting up with insult after insult, he finally drew his sword on Kira, wounding him in the process. Of course, in the capital though, this was very much a crime, and one that was punishable by death. As a man of honor, Asano accepted his punishment and was ordered to commit seppuku as fit with his standing as a samurai. His clan of 300 men were disbanded, and Asano Naganori's estate was stripped of all holdings. But although the majority of his men would go off to wander the countryside masterless, a group of them couldn't accept this beseechment of honor. 47 of them to be precise, the 47 Ronin, masterless samurai who would go on to plot their revenge for over 2 years, relentlessly training day after day, seeking only one thing: justice for their wronged master and the death of Kira Yoshinaka. Well, on the 14th of December 1702, that is exactly what happened, and the 47 Ronin marched into Edo to Yoshinaka's mansion, who had assembled the city guard to defend him. The 47 Ronin fought like warrior poets, defeating Kira's force in the name of their fallen master, sustaining just 2 injuries in the process. One of them was a sprained ankle. Eventually they found Kira, where they then cut off his head, and carried it through the city of Edo to the grave of their master Asano Naganori. Here the 47 Ronin place his head on Asano's grave, serving their final purpose, where they then turn themselves into the city. And then, moved by the impossible feat of loyalty displayed by the Ronin, the city allowed them to commit seppuku, restoring the honor of Asano Naganori and immortalizing themselves forever in the legend of the 47 Ronin.
Number 5. King Casmir IV. In the 1970s, 12 archaeologists opened a tomb in Krakow, Poland of unknown date. Somewhere around 500 years ago, they think. 1427, King Casimir Jagiellon IV. He grows up to become the Grand Duke of Lithuania in 1440, and then, eventually, King of Poland in 1447. Fast forward back to the 1970s. The Chapel of Wawel Castle. They find a wooden coffin basically rotten, and what remained were only sections of the king's decaying corpse. Spooky. But then 4 out of the 12 researchers who were working on exhuming the tomb passed away the following couple of days. Suddenly this seemed to be a repeat of a similar event that happened about 50 years ago. Yeah. At least a dozen researchers, either working on site or handling artifacts in a lab, began to experience severe health problems, even lethal. Yeah. Talk about cursed tombs. Holy moly. An agreement to examine the historical site was debauched for a while. Excitement for any kind of scientific research due to the strict government in the 1970s, you see. Cardinal Karol Wojtyla, this guy was a huge supporter of scientific research and already studying King Casimir's dad. He was responsible for the decision to open and study the tomb a few years later. And after that, a few years later, he becomes Pope John Paul II. Like, how awesome is that? Guy was woke back then. He was like, nah, science rules, we need to dig in. The story caught the attention of a nation. Before the burial site was exhumed, the archaeologists and citizens all joked that the tomb was cursed and those who continued should proceed with caution. And then 4 of them, well, yeah. I mean, numerous types of mold spores that cause potential health risks to humans if inhaled. This is like the Howard Carter case all over again. Most tombs in ancient sites contain a pathogenic fungus called Aspergillus flavus. Causes allergies, asthma, and likely fatality. Yeah, big stuff. Heavy stuff. Number 4, the Assyrian Tablet. As always, dudes, if you like what we do here at Top 5 Scary, hit that thumbs up button, alright? 6'1" height. That's how tall I am, and that's how tall our next curse is. But engraved onto a slab of basalt. 6'1", absolutely massive, and talk about heavy, too. Quote, whoever discards this image from the presence of Salmanu puts it in another place, whether he throws it into water or covers it with earth, or brings and places it in a taboo house where it is inaccessible. May the god Salmanu, the great lord, overthrow his sovereignty. May his name and his seed disappear in the land. Okay, yep, no, that's definitely a curse. Sounds like Rush lyrics, doesn't it? I feel like Geddy Lee wrote this. Written by an unknown author, inscribed onto an Assyrian tablet 800 BC. Ah, definitely not Rush then. And again, this thing is massive, but now, unfortunately, broken in 2. One half ended up in the hands of the British Museum and the other Bonham's auction house. Look, I understand private collectors are a thing, but like, can we just have like a non-biased, geographically neutral ancient library that we can all just collectively study? So many that's mine, no, that's mine. Sounds like kids fighting over this stuff, doesn't it? We're all just curious, we want to know. The fragment in the British Museum's collection was found in 1879 in Syria. It was formed in basalt to commemorate a military achievement of King Adad Nirari III. The British Museum has the top of the statue with the image of the knight's head portion. Again, this thing has gone through so many legalities about ownership, like, where did we find it? Who wrote it? The carvings show the rulers alongside sacred symbols, the winged sun disk of Shamash, the star of Ishtar, and the thunderbolt of the weather god Adad. The lower portion was put up for auction by a private collector in London in 2014, and in 2017, the bottom half made international headlines. Once again. This time it was at the center of a dispute between its former owner and the commissioner of the Metropolitan Police in London. The commissioner apparently was sued by a Lebanese antiques dealer after police confiscated the relic. Yeah, too much arguing for me. Like, just share it. Couple months here, couple months there. I don't know. Just get along so we can study the damn thing. Number 3, Polish King's Curse. In April 1931, in a crypt in Vilnius, ancient Polish queens and kings were found, but they were found with their crowns still on their heads. Yeah, cryptic stuff. It was a royal burial, you see. Described by those involved as the discovery of a century. Polish researchers didn't even know what they were in for. After a massive storm had flooded a crumbling cathedral in Vilnius, they threw down sandbags to preserve the artifacts, but on the night of April 25th, the water had won the battle and the chambers were completely flooded. They followed the water deeper and deeper to the lost remains of Polish kings and queens from the 15th century. Storm of the century, I'd say. Out of place and messy, but definitely royal nonetheless. The floating, muddy remains of Queen Elizabeth Habsburg and Queen Barbara Radziwillona. Royalty. Not meant to be really floating around in the rainwater, you know? Now, after these discoveries, that's when things get creepy. That's when the talks of a so-called curse began. Those involved in the findings began to die in unusual circumstances. Professors falling down elevator shafts, 2 having undisclosed medical issues, 1 professor becoming paralyzed in an accident, Professor Julius Klaus died from an unusual illness. Like, scary. Even a sculptor involved died when untying his shoelaces. That sort of stuff. Like creepy curse stuff. Even if you try and protect the remains of lost kings and queens and their history, even if you're involved, the curse apparently will get you. These curses are heavy, dude. These people were just trying to help and preserve this stuff, but royal curses are royal curses. Spooky stuff. Number 2, fairy forts. So apparently fairy forts in Ireland are a thing. A very respected and very old thing. This is awesome and equally terrifying. Something about a big burly Irishman saying, "Oh, you don't go messing around them fairy mounds now, son." Like, that's horrifying. I'm surprised there isn't more indie Irish horror movies about these things. Serious business. More than 45,000 of them still surviving, and approximately 10,000 destroyed since the first large survey in the 19th century. In County Clare, locals protested the path was through an ancient fairy bush, or a fairy mound. So be careful if you live in Ireland, because apparently an ancient curse of Tara has been unleashed by the destruction of a fundamental ancient fairy fort. Traditional myth and local legend says interfering with fairies' homes is to risk your own life, with most believing strongly in the curse of Tara, the retribution of fairies on those involved in the disturbance of their natural home. In this case, the M3 motorway. Yeah, the N22 is the main road between Killarney and County Kerry and Cork, Ireland, otherwise known as the Emerald Isle. Associated with fairies for more than hundreds of years, dating back to the Iron Age and beyond, when the country was said to be under the power of the mystical Tuatha De Danann, a race of supernatural beings which were kind of like gods. In June 2007, Minister for the Environment Dick Roche signed an order destroying the Lismullen Henge. Lismullen Henge was a 4,000-year-old astronomical observatory and place of worship, once hailed as one of the most important archaeological finds of the century. And, of course, bad things followed. Surveyors held up by an armed gang, the Minister for Transport sucked out of a helicopter when the door mysteriously fell off, the Chief of Health and Safety Officer was struck by a falling tree. Hey, how about we listen to this ancient Irish lore and not around, huh? Also, it's a road. You can't build a little curve around a 4,000-year-old monument? Really? Come on, people. Number 1, Fisus and Porello. 2 cursed 1600-year-old lead tablets in the Museo Archeologico Civico di Bologna were recently deciphered. And one of them turns out to be one of the first known surviving curses directed at a Roman senator. That can't be good. This one's a juicy one. Well, these 2, because it's a pair of lead cursed tablets. First off, how much must you have someone off before they get a big rock and start chipping and chiseling away at it for like 4 years straight? Like, if you're still mad after a day of chiseling rock or metal, it's serious. Usually a couple of deep breaths in about 5 minutes gets you over anything. But like, you know what I mean? Just anger. A drawing of a snake-headed deity, possibly Hecate, the goddess of the underworld, crossroads, and sorcery, with her arms crossed and a star carved over her. Although her name is not mentioned, the phrasing of the invocation is similar to the other curses that enlist Hecate and their dark curses. The crossed arms symbolize the binding of the deity to the curse. The goddess will remain bound until its terms are fulfilled. This is what it says. Quote, "Crush, kill Fistus the senator. May Fistus dilute, languish, sink, and may all of his limbs dissolve." Okay, it's a little harsh, no? The other lead tablet, cursing Porello, has a little less violence, but still, yeah, pretty hateful. The cursed person's name Porello and his wife Morelia. Same snake-headed deity with crossed arms, but this time, Porello gets a drawing too. He's portrayed as a wrapped mummy with his arms crossed and his name written on both of them. Quote, "Destroy, crush, kill, strangle Porello and Morelia. Their soul, heart, and buttocks, liver." Again, what did these people do? Like, liver? That's so specific. Unfortunately, we don't know where they came from. They were acquired by the museum in the 19th century, then forgotten about until about their rediscovery in 2009. The museum has no specific record of acquisition of the tablet's provenance. They could be anywhere from the late Roman Empire. Yeah, anywhere. The two curses, mainly written in Latin and inscribed on thin lead, would have been created by two different people in the late life of the Roman Empire. They both lay at the Museo Archeologico Civico in Italy. Yo, I don't want to get dissolved. People are saying dissolved a lot, you know? That's really harsh. This curses, man. Serious stuff.
Number 5, Keramikos. Coming up first is going to be a tomb from ancient Greece. Beautiful place, beautiful tombs. Keramikos is a beautiful neighborhood in Greece. It was the pottery center of Greece, if you can believe that, which would be interesting enough to print on a travel brochure, but it's also home to a cemetery that's existed since the Bronze Age. So that's some seriously old bones. Now, old bones aren't necessarily scary, but in 2020, when archaeologists discovered 30 stone tablets buried beneath a well, each engraved with curses crying out for help from the gods of the underworld, now maybe that's a bit cursed. The Greeks would bury curses or requests, hoping the gods would hear them and grant them favor. Personally though, word to the wise, take it from Kratos or Zagreus, never make a deal with any of the gods of Olympus. It is simply just not worth it. Apparently, this sort of thing, that is, you know, the practice of chucking cursed tablets into the graves with your dead, was not actually that uncommon in ancient Greece. Curses enshrined on tablets made from lead, wax, and stone were fairly common in Greece, where religion, magic, and science all kind of blended together into one beautiful blurred line as the answers to a lot of life's questions. Oftentimes, these cursed tablets were used to restrict rivals, place a curse on someone you didn't like much, or if you had a court case and you didn't want someone to speak up, you could always curse them out of testifying. I'm sure Saul Goodman would have loved that trick. Researchers believe that water was especially sacred to the ancient Greeks, and that this discovery of 30 tablets in the well suggests that perhaps this was a case of someone trying to curse a whole community. It was thought too that wells were a route to the underworld and guarded by nymphs. So the scatterings of vessels and mugs found around the cursed tablets were thought to be gifts and offerings to the nymphs. Usually I just go for like a $15 Starbucks card in scenarios like that, especially if I don't really know the nymph that well. And my friends, if you're looking for more scary content, you don't need to go anywhere, you're in the right place. Stay subscribed for hundreds upon hundreds of scary videos, crypts, tombs, ghosts, aliens, cryptids, and more, oh my.
Number 4, the Alexandria Black Tomb. I'm not sure if anybody else remembers this one, but I certainly do. I remember seeing it on the news. It certainly got my attention. Here we go. Back in July 2018, experts discovered a 2,000-year-old sealed black granite sarcophagus in Alexandria, Egypt. Now, initially, yes, this is exciting. This is amazing. This is the find of a lifetime. But it doesn't take long for speculation to then creep its way in. Do we open it? Do we not open it? What if it's something bad? What if it's a 2,000-year-old ancient virus? Do we do it? I don't know. We did it. Humans being as curious as we were, we just had to see what was inside. And inside, we did not find treasure. Rather, we found mummy juice. Just mummy juice. Inside were the remains of 3 Egyptian army officers accompanied by this reddish brown sewage liquid. It was disgusting. All the experts fled the scene. It smelled so bad. This is where that sarcophagus juice meme came from. This was the actual box. Mustafa Waziri, the Secretary General of the Supreme Council of Antiquities, he declared that the mummies had decomposed in the tomb for thousands of years and that it resembled a family burial. Yeah, family burial. How lovely is that? Nice discount on that one. There were bones of 3 people in a puddle of sarcophagus juice. That is disgusting. That is not Alexander the Great. Definitely not. The coffin was found in a tomb in the city believed to be the final resting place of Alexander the Great. So you kind of have to open it at that point, right? This could literally be him. Or it could be mummy juice from 305 BC. One or the other. Do we like this? Do we like opening up ancient curses? Did anything happen here? Waziri assured us immediately that he said that we've opened it and thank God the world has not fallen into darkness. Now remind you, this was a year before the plague arrived, so.
Number 3, Kinshihang. The tomb of former emperor of China, Qin Shi Huang, is notable for many reasons. Maybe it was because in 1974, when farmers from the Shaanxi province were digging a well, they discovered hundreds upon hundreds of terracotta soldiers, complete with horses, chariots, officers, infantry, and a whole court. They discovered one of the world's greatest archaeological wonders. 2,000 terracotta soldiers. Qin Shi Huang's tomb. The tomb was built like this basically to serve as history's most impressive flex. Qin Shi Huang wanted to make it good and clear that even in death, he held more might and imperial power than anyone could ever imagine, and he wanted his own army to take with him in the afterlife. They say you can't take it with you, but he did. What's wild is we don't even know how far this tomb goes, since it still hasn't been fully uncovered. Those thousands of terracotta soldiers, those might just have been the first wave of guys coming out the door. While he reigned, Kinshihang wanted to make sure his tomb was a very good approximation of his own legacy. So, naturally, thousands of laborers worked tirelessly for decades to create a tomb worthy of China's emperor. It's estimated that 700,000 laborers are thought to have worked on the tomb, which took nearly 40 years to build. Kinshihang only even lived to be 49, so good thing they finished that in time, eh? Kinshihang himself is thought to be buried beneath an enormous pyramid-shaped mound that stands a good distance from the excavated portion of the tomb. Now, according to historians, the central tomb contains treasures and wondrous objects collected during his life, included a flowing river of pure mercury, which ironically back then they associated that with immortality. Now I think we associate that with poisoning. Soil testing the nearby areas has revealed elevated levels of mercury in the dirt, so this might actually be true. However, no one is too eager to go digging or check, since it sounds like Kinshihang kitted this place out like a video game dungeon to keep any would-be Nathan Drakes or Lara Crofts from raiding this uncharted tomb. The tomb is said to be protected by ancient ballistas and complex mechanisms that will fire arrows at any potential grave robbers and make Indiana Jones blush. And that mercury vapor probably is not doing anybody any favors either. In any case, the Chinese government has been in no rush to explore what's down there. It's best to let the sleeping dead lie, especially when he has got thousands of terracotta bodyguards who, I don't know, maybe they're cursed, maybe they'll come to life. I just wouldn't mess with it.
Number 2. King Tut's artifacts. The new Grand Egyptian Museum was finally opened to the public in 2021 after many delays. And while that's quite recent, the contents displayed inside, they certainly are not. For the first time in history, many of King Tut's ancient belongings will be on display. Now, prior to this museum being opened, we only saw about 150 artifacts from his tomb. They all went on tour, like Kiss, they just went on tour. But now this museum in a beautiful space that spans over 7,000 square meters. It's awesome. Now, cut back to the initial discovery, not so great. November 4th, 1922, ancient history was unearthed. A team of researchers led by British archaeologist Howard Carter discovered this entrance, the literal entrance to King Tut's tomb. Now, only 3 weeks later, King Tut's actual tomb was then unearthed. Now, hasn't been disturbed in over 3,000 years, and then we came in with some shovels and made him an exhibit. Awesome, grab your tickets. #Tut. This discovery spawned the curse of the pharaohs. Why, of course, because almost every expert involved in that discovery, they all experienced horrible luck. Many of them actually just died. Tragic events. It was crazy. Howard Carter, the archaeologist who discovered the actual tomb, he gave a paperweight to his friend Bruce Ingham as a gift. Now, that paperweight in hand, pun intended, was a mummified hand wearing a bracelet. Inscribed on said bracelet read the phrase, "Cursed be he who moves my body." Ingham's house then burned to the ground not long after receiving said gift, and then when he tried to rebuild the home, it was then destroyed in a flood. That's just one example. Some people, like I said, straight up died. Car accidents, just random medical issues, sicknesses, like I said about plagues and Egyptian mummies, breathing in some old shit. It's not great. Lots of dark history being unearthed. That's all King Tut.
And finally, number 1, the Torrp Runestone. Vikings regularly used runes in their runic magic. What else would you use for runic magic? Vikings would inscribe the stones, and they could wield the magical power of words, the Thum, if you will. This magic could take all forms, blessings, curses, and I'm sure in at least one case, probably a pretty sick fireball. The Torrp Runestone, and I know for a fact I am not pronouncing that correctly, so please feel free to let me know in the comments how it should be going, is a famous example of a runestone and some runic magic. Located in Blekinge, Sweden, the rock itself is surrounded by mystery, and the inscription on it carries a pretty scary warning. I, master of the runes, conceal here runes of power. Incessantly plagued by maleficence, doomed to insidious death is he who breaks this monument. I prophesize the destruction. Okay, so that honestly sounds pretty clear cut and dry what is happening with this runestone. It sounds like this stone guarantees a nice rainfall every year. No, of course not. It's a very scary warning. No one really knows what the Torrp Runestone represents though, or even if it's buried on top of something significant. Is it a tomb? No one's really willing to mess with it to find out. Kratos hasn't come by to ravage this place for upgrade materials yet. Is that too many God of War Ragnarok references in one video? No, of course not. If I had my way, it'd be Ragnarok all the way down. Anyway, back on topic. Anthropologists and archaeologists have done their level best to ascertain just what's going on here without tripping any possible runic curses, just to be safe. A tomb is one of the most popular theories, but there are others, suggesting that possibly it's a memorial for a real burial far, far away, possibly to mislead somebody, grave robbers maybe. A second suggestion is that it is a mighty shrine for Odin, offering him runes of power in exchange for blessings of fertility and harvest. A third, significantly less popular theory offered by some researchers is that it was put in place to somehow control the mystical powers of Icelandic singer-songwriter and my personal hero Bjork, who has been known to be completely uncontrollable.
Number 5. Mirror, mirror. Starting off this list, we arrive at somewhat of a tame curse. I mean, not tame, because I've hit nothing but red lights for the past month since I broke mine. We've all broken a mirror or two, haven't we? Little hand mirror here or there. Apparently breaking some melted liquid sand can get you in some pretty hot water. Almost everybody has heard of breaking mirrors. Pretty well dooms you to at least 7 years and of bad luck. We've all done it. It happens. Well, apparently it's an old curse. This one's origins begin in ancient Rome. The Romans believed that the human soul would renew every 7 years, repairing whatever damage they had suffered during that time. They also thought that a mirror's reflection was a way to look inside said soul. So what they thought was, if you break a mirror, you break a little bit of your soul as well, which would then again have to go through this 7-year cycle to renew and cleanse that bad aura right out of you. Yeah, do this for 7 years as your soul is reborn. You endure misfortune because of your imperfect, now shattered soul. Sounds like a bad breakup. Mirrors were not cheap either back then, and they were pretty low quality and easily breakable. In order to avoid negligence to the owners, it was also known that breaking a mirror and the whole 7 years of bad luck thing was also a simple scare tactic. I'm not making any more mirrors. You know how much work that is? Like, if you break it, you buy it, pal, and 7 years of bad luck too. I don't know, it's hard. These take a long time to make. Next time, just watch your hands, please. Number 4, St. Anne's Well. As always, if you like what we do here at Top 5 Scary, hit us up with a like. A little spot my family likes to call home. Liverpool, England, and also one of the newest reasons that I'm never revisiting again. In 2016, archaeologists uncovered an ancient well near Liverpool that dates to the medieval era. Archaeologists say that they rediscovered a large sandstone well on a private farm in Liverpool. When archaeologists arrived at the site, there was barely anything of a well, as it had become completely filled with earth for hundreds of years. The cult of St. Anne was once a widespread medieval following. The mother of the Virgin Mary, Anne, is often associated with great and powerful healing wells. Anne supposedly bathed in the well, which was known for treating skin and eye diseases. Like OG LASIK, you know, just hop right on in, cataracts gone in a flash. Apparently for centuries, a priory of 12 monks tended to the well mid-16th century, and there was a huge competition and demand for this hot spring. The priory's father and his neighbor both claimed ownership. He's being snide, isn't he? He's being a snide one. Classic case of Darcy versus Delwayne. 2 days later, King Henry VIII shows up, and after all the talk with his men, they seized the well and both dudes lost out. Scouse his luck, mates, go on, scouse his luck. Apparently lore goes, Delwayne cursed Darcy, and according to legend, Delwayne then dropped dead on the spot. Talk about karma, dude. Within 3 months, Darcy's son had passed away from unknown illnesses as well as Darcy losing his job. And a year later, Darcy was found at the bottom of said well. Despite the grim legend, the well continued to be used even after the lore had become widespread. It actually made it more popular. It was purposely buried, but then recently discovered, restored, and reinforced. I only do the wishing wells. You know, those are the only wells that I do. They're the nice kind. Number 3, the Knights Templar. Everybody knows about the superstition about the number 13. Supposedly unlucky. Dude, I lived on the 14th floor for like 3 years. Lights always flickered, always. Just saying. We're also familiar with the Friday the 13th being unlucky and not just a banger of a Halloween movie. But not a lot of people know where this 13 thing actually originates from. In the early 14th century, King Philip of France was at war with the English. There was this really rich group called the Knights Templar, and after funding King Philip's side of the war, he didn't really have any intention on paying them back. Yeah, you see, the Knights Templar had become a powerful organization in Europe. The most powerful. During the Crusades, King Philip needed supplies and revisions. Never intending to pay them back, of course, Philip doubled down, conspiring with Pope Clement V, who, on Friday, October 13th, 1307, led an ambush, seize, mass arrest of the Knights' leader Jacques de Molay and all of his men. They were all charged and imprisoned. He was tortured, imprisoned, and burned at the stake. However, before dying, Jacques de Molay cursed both enemies, claiming that both Clement and Philip would be dead within the year and that their names would be forgotten. Clement succumbed to a fatal disease. Philip died of a stroke, like right after each other. By 1328, all of Philip's sons and grandsons had perished from rapid illness, and the curse had sprung true. Yeah, I wouldn't cross the Navy SEALs of the medieval times. Probably not a good idea. Now I got flickering lights because you two backstabbed a cult army for doing something nice for you? Shame on you. Number 2, the Pella Tablet. In 1986, archaeologists unearthed a cursed tablet during excavations of the ancient Macedonian capital of Pella. Archaeologists uncovered 1,600 Greek cursed tablets since then. However, the Pella Tablet is still by far the oldest, and apparently the most cursed. Created somewhere between 400 and 350 BC, the Pella Tablet is a letter to the gods asking them for help to curse a woman who stole her man's heart. And not like a sappy mixtape or anything, this curse is inscribed on lead scroll. It's metal paper. The writer, one who calls herself Degina, calls upon divine powers from the gods to solve her problem. Her beloved, Dionysophon, is on the verge of marriage to another woman. Degina wants him to herself, of course, and then asks the gods for some help. The language on the stone is so old that it actually predates the modern and ancient Macedonian language. These cursed tablets, or spell scrolls, were called katatismoi, or deficciones, and it was widely believed that they would continue to work and curse as long as the text and tablet existed. Basically, as long as there's batteries in there, it's gonna keep on cursing. James L. O'Neill from the University of Sydney interprets the translation of the ancient text as, quote, "forbid by writing the ceremony and the marriage of Dionysophon and Thetima, and all other women, and widows and virgins, but especially Thetima. And I assign them to Macron and the Daemones. And whenever I shall unroll and read this again after digging it up, then Dionysophon may marry. But not before. May he not take any wife but me, and may I and no other woman grow old with Dionysophon. I am your suppliant. Pity me, dear Daemonis, for I am weak and bereft of all friends. But protect me so this does not happen and evil Thetima will perish evilly. But may I be fortunate and blessed." Whoa, for never was a story more woe than this of Thetima and her Dionysophon. I think it sounds better than Romeo and Juliet. What do you think? I mean, that's not very nice to wish there, Degina. Kinda mean if you ask me, and very jealous. Also, Thetima, girl, you gotta split. This girl's out here looking for you. You're gonna catch some hands for talking to someone else's man. I'm just saying, you've been warned. Number 1, the Torrp Runestone. Of course, the number 1 spot, Torrp Runestone. I had to. I just did my ancestry and apparently I'm 12% Viking. Yeah, I just sent my spit somewhere and they told me that. This specific cursed runestone is one of the many megalithic standing stones located in Sweden. This one actually is one of the world's tallest as well, measuring 4.5 meters high. It's part of a stone circle with 2 other blank standing stones. Scholars date the runestone's inscription to the 7th century AD. It's carved with a type of rune that form an intermediate version between the elder Futhark and the younger Futhark. The runestone is inscribed on both sides. The short message reads, "I foresee perdition," and the longer side translates to, "I, master of the runes, conceal here runes of power, incessantly plagued by maleficence, doomed to insidious death. Is he who breaks this monument. I prophesy destruction." A little aggressive, bro, but I guess, they were Vikings, so aggression was kind of their thing. Local lore says that the curse came true at one point. Long ago, a man wanted to move the runestone so that he could have more room to farm, so he piled wood around it in an attempt to heat the stone and then crack it with water. As soon as he lit the fire, the man's hair lit aflame. His clothes were soon engulfed and the man perished right there next to the ruin. Yo, I would just avoid these at all costs. Like, no point should you ever be trying to move an ancient Viking cursed megalith. Again, unless you're Kratos helping Loki climb a mountain.
Kicking off at number 5, the Lost Roman Legion. A mystery that has baffled Roman historians for eons. The Legio IX Hispania, or the 9th Legion, also commonly known as the Lost Legion, was one of the most renowned fighting forces of the Roman Empire that existed from the 1st century BC BC until at least 120 AD. They collected countless battles and victories across the Empire's influence, participating in the Siege of Asculum in 90 BC, as well as fighting ferociously beside Mark Antony in the Battle of Actium. Following the assassination of Caesar, they were one of the Senate's most powerful military tools and battled the Cantabrians of Spain as well as the Germanic tribes of the Rhine borderlands. And after that, their successes led them to Britain, where they participated in the Roman invasion led by Emperor Claudius, and it is thought that they were stationed there all the way until 120 AD. And then they disappeared. Completely, seemingly fell off the face of the earth. Now, the Romans were incredibly diligent record keepers. It's why we know so much about them and why they made extensive records of every military battle and confrontation, even their losses, so they could better develop their imperial machine. And the 9th Legion, after seemingly heading to Scotland to fight the Picts and Celtic tribes, just disappeared. No notes, no records, nothing. Now, the Lost Legion was made up of over 5,000 men, and somehow, in the strange mists of time, they all completely disappeared. I guess we'll never know. Coming in at number 4, the Sky Caves of Napal. Also known as the Mustang Caves, the Sky Caves of Napal are a collection of over 10,000 man-made caves dug deep into the sides of the Himalayan Valley in the Mustang district of Napal. This place has absolutely baffled archaeologists and researchers since their discovery in the mid-90s, when local explorers began venturing inside the stacked caves and found several dozen partially mummified human bodies, all at least between 2,000 and 3,000 years old. Further exploration of these caves has led to discoveries of valuable Buddhist paintings, sculptures, manuscripts, and numerous ancient artifacts that is thought to belong to the 12th and 14th century. But the fact that the Sky Caves seem to predate them by over at the least 2,000 years has offered no answer to the burning question: who built these caves and why? Since 1996, the Sky Caves of Napal have been listed as a UNESCO tentative site, and the Mustang region was formerly known as the Kingdom of Lo until its annexation by Napal at the end of the 18th century. This in turn made it a restricted demilitarized area until 1992, making it one of the most preserved and isolated regions on the planet. Seemingly, whoever was making these caves have been there for at least 3,000 years, burying their dead in elaborate ritualistic ceremonial sky tombs, and no one has any idea why. Swinging in at number 3, the Ridgeway Hill Viking Burial Pit. And this one is so heavy metal that I have no idea. It could literally make up the plot of a Clive Barker film. In September 2008, archaeologists from Oxford Archaeology began excavating along the route of the A354 when they discovered a burial pit on nearby Ridgeway Hill containing the bodies of what appeared to be 54 Viking mercenaries. And all of them were decapitated. Not only were they all decapitated though, but when their remains were discovered, it was found that they were all in relatively neat little piles. Their heads in one pile, their torsos in another, like some kind of ancient hunting grounds visitor attraction. Researchers are stumped about the Ridgeway Hill pit. There are no leading theories, and the vast majority of it just doesn't make sense. Carbon dating found that their remains dated back to between 970 and 1025 AD. And they were all of Scandinavian origin and carried the physiques of warriors. One leading theory is that the group were somehow ambushed by nearby villagers and ceremoniously slaughtered, but that makes zero sense and has no ties to the known ritualistic practices of the native Britons. Also, markings on the Vikings' bones showed that the method of execution was a bizarre mix of crude and incredibly precise blows, and there was a total of 188 wounds visible on the skeletons, an average of 4 per Viking, one of which had the top of his skull sliced off, exposing his brain. Vampiric blood ritual, ancient cult sacrifice, I have no idea, but the Ridgeway Hill pit doesn't make any sense at all. Next up at number 2, Göbekli Tepe. And to be honest, I could talk about Göbekli Tepe all day, because what the hell is going down in that place, we'll maybe never know. Göbekli Tepe, which is Turkish for Potbelly Hill, is an ancient megalithic site that was evidently used for social ritualistic practices. Oh, and also, it dates back to the 10th millennium BC. At at the least. Just look at this place and you'll understand exactly why this is so insanely baffling. During a time which most anthropologists agree we as humans were primitive hunter-gatherers. But nah, Göbekli Tepe seems to say otherwise, with the structure itself making up patterns of absolutely massive T-shaped stone pillars, more than 200 of them, which form around 20 separate circles and are currently the world's oldest known megaliths, older than Stonehenge. Do you know the kind of ingenuity it takes to build a structure like that? So during a time when mankind was seemingly roaming the plains hunting mammoths, we were actually building incomprehensibly vast structures. Klaus Schmidt, who was a leading German archaeologist, held the belief that Göbekli Tepe was a vastly important pilgrimage destination and a somewhat cathedral for a primitive cult of the dead. Though no tombs or graves have ever been found at the site, Schmidt believed that they remain to be discovered, hidden in niches located behind the temple walls. It's important to note that the vast majority of Göbekli Tepe is yet to be unearthed, and mainstream archaeology has primarily ignored this site. For all intents and purposes, it may be one of the most important ancient structures of our species. As Ian Hodder of Stanford University says, Göbekli Tepe changes everything. And finally, our number one spot, the Sphinx. And bear with me, because there is one ancient structure that is beyond baffling: the Sphinx and the perpetual mystery that surrounds it. Now, I'm a stickler for science, but there is something about the Great Sphinx of Giza that just doesn't add up. Now, hear me out, because the vast majority of Egyptologists claim that the Sphinx is 4,512 years old, which would have meant it was built in the year 2494 BC. But that completely ignores the fact that there are certain very clear weathering patterns on the Sphinx that do not occur in any other ancient structures in the area, the Great Pyramids included. Author John Anthony West, alongside geologist Robert M. Schoch, found very clear evidence of water erosion on the structure, which is not consistent of the environmental climate patterns of the given time. These patterns and the effect of water erosion would be consistent in a time when Egypt was a wet and rainy landscape, meaning that the Sphinx would have had to be between 7,000 and 10,000 years old. On another note, between 1991 and 1993, when West's team were examining the Sphinx, they found evidence of hollow, regularly shaped spaces and chambers between the pores and at either side of the structure. Egyptologists completely put an end to their examination and forbid any other work. The mysteries of the Sphinx are countless, and one thing is for certain: they're not being fully explored by modern research. Well, what do you guys think about the mystery of the Sphinx? Let us know in the comment box down below. I know you will.
Number 5, the Sword of Daneslef. The Sword of Daneslef, and hey, there's a good chance I'm pronouncing that wrong, so let me know, is among the most famous of weapons in Nordic myths, a legendary cursed sword of yore. Daneslef was the blade of King Hogni, who was a noble king in ancient Viking stories. The Daneslef sword was handcrafted by the dwarf Dane, who is said to be among the most skilled craftsmen in all of the realms. The name of the sword literally translates to Dane's legacy. However, the sword had been imbued with a dark, powerful magic energy. Whenever the mighty Daneslef was drawn, it could not be sheathed until blood had coated its blade. Someone had to die to feed the thirst of blood that quelled inside the tempered steel. Not just that too, but this cursed sword must have had like a very specific hunger pang for neck blood, as the sword had to behead an enemy. Sounds like an extremely high maintenance cursed sword. Surely all blood tastes the same, right? To a sword? I don't know, maybe I'm being dismissive. The sword features prominently in the story of Prose Edda, an ancient Nordic textbook thought to date back from the 12th century, which told the story of King Hogni and his beautiful daughter Hild, while he warred in the eternal battle of the kings. According to this old story, Hogni came to meet other kings across the land, and brought his daughter to introduce them. However, a jealous rival king seized his daughter and stole her away. Hogni gathered as many of his most fearsome warriors as he could to reclaim her, and sailed west in pursuit of his daughter. He found her on an island, yet her captor had attempted to persuade Hogni into making peace with him. But Hogni told him it was too late to end that. I mean, makes sense, you stole my daughter, bro. But the Daneslef had been drawn, and it couldn't be sheathed until he'd been beheaded. The legend then goes on to state that the two men fought for 143 years. But I'm hoping they took like 2 15-minute breaks a day at least. And my ghouls and goblins, if you love the scares we put out for you, the nicest way to show thanks is to toss a little like and subscribe our way. If you're already subscribed, you're the coolest. If you're not, Well, I still like you lots, but you could really win me over with a like and subscribe. Just saying, if you wanted to get on my good side. Number 4. Runes of Power. To the Vikings, runes and runic magic were a cornerstone of their culture. Runes were their language, after all, their written language. The old poem Havamal explains that Odin, the Allfather, discovered the runes when he hung himself from the world tree, Yggdrasil, in order to attain enlightenment. As he hung on the tree, blowing for 9 nights and 9 days, he found himself slowly fading away, ready to be taken away to hell, when as he was about to die, he found the runes, took them, and earned his life, and bestowed them to humanity. Carving a rune into an object imbued it with a great deal of power. With the right inscriptions and the aid of a powerful seeress or sorceress, you could predict the future, protect yourself, or your family from misfortune. You could even imbue a blade with powerful energy. Skyrim got that right exactly. As well, runes were said to be the key to activating conjurations, curses, and spells, but as well, runic inspirations were found to bless just everyday things. Oftentimes, they told stories within them too. Runestones were also used in Viking culture as landmarks, and the inscriptions they bore contained powerful magic within them. Take the Glavendrup stone, which contains a powerful warning to anyone who dares to move it. Listen to what it says. Ragnhildr placed this stone in memory of Ali the Pale, priest of the sanctuary, honorable thane of the retinue. Ali's sons made the monument in memory of their father, and his wife in memory of her husband, and Soti carved these runes in memory of his lord. Thor, hallow these runes. A warlock be he who damages this stone, drags it in memory of another. So this runestone's got a little curse put in place to make sure no one disturbs the slumber of Ali the Pale. Perhaps one of the most famous runestones in the world is the Björktorp runestone in Sweden. A mysterious runestone whose purpose is not fully known, but bears another frightening inscription. Listen to this one, and I gotta put a bit of a voice on for this one, you'll understand. I, master of the runes, conceal here runes of power. Incessantly plagued by maleficence, doomed to insidious death is he who breaks this monument. Do forgive me, but can you imagine me just reading that normal? Would not have worked. So we might not know what the Björktorp runestone is for, but we can say with certainty no one is willing to move it to find out what might be built on top of it, just in case runic magic is real and they don't want to experiment with dooming themselves to an insidious death plagued by malfeasance. That sounds terrible. Number 3. The Yonaguni Monument. You've heard of the lost city of Atlantis. Surely. Of course you have. It's one of the best Disney movies you forgot about. That's a story for a whole other video. Well, what if it wasn't the only lost underwater city out there? Have you ever heard of the Yonaguni Monument? The Yonaguni Monument has sometimes been called Japan's Atlantis, and it refers to a strange, eerie underwater rock formation just off the coast of Yonaguni Island in Japan that has had people scratching their heads for years. It's a massive structure consisting of several flat rock slabs arranged in a way that seems like an intelligent life put it together. Now, some people say that this structure could be completely natural, resulting from years of erosion and tectonic activity. Certainly, stranger things have happened, and it wouldn't be completely impossible for something to form this way, but the way it exists now, the way it sits, it seems deliberately carved out, and it seems like it was an important structure to someone. Perhaps a monument, a temple, some sign of a lost city, hence the Atlantis comparisons. Is it possible this was evidence of a lost civilization buried beneath the ocean waves, forever forgotten to history? The monument being completely submerged has been fuel for the fire of speculation. Was it always underwater? Did it end up there over time? Did the water raise around it? Did the land used to look significantly different? It makes it pretty difficult to study as well, making it just that little bit more elusive, as if it wasn't mysterious enough as is. But let's be real, it was probably aliens. It was almost certainly aliens. Number 2. Viking graves. Now, the Vikings were a very superstitious people. Ghosts were a very common belief and possible threat in medieval Norway. Your soul could go just about all over. You might end up in Valhall, the realm of Odin, where you can drink and fight to your heart's content for eternity, or you could end up in Folkvanger, Freya's realm, a lush, bountiful field that sprawled forever, or you could end up in Helheim, which was just a terrible, cold, dismal place. Imagine spending your entire life in freezing Scandinavia, dying, and then waking up in a different freezing afterlife. I would be so upset. Of course, if you didn't qualify for any of these afterlife options, you could always end up with your soul trapped on the earth and reanimated as a ghost or a corpse zombie monster called a Draugr, which anyone who spent too much time inside of any of Skyrim's caves can tell you are a real nuisance. So Vikings had to come up with all sorts of ways to make sure that nobody came back to cause any problems for the village. No doubt you've heard of Viking funerary ships or their pyres, where their dead were sent off into the water in a longboat with possessions that might befit them in the afterlife, and then lit ablaze with an arrow. But oftentimes, that was more for higher caste members of society. Other burials were traditional, but the body was kept in the home for a few days to prepare. The Vikings took all sorts of fun precautions to make sure they wouldn't have a draugr on their hands. The head was wrapped in bandages. Oftentimes the feet would be bound or sewn together, or even needles would be placed into the feet to make sure, just in case they came back to life, they wouldn't be able to walk. Corpses were brought into houses feet first because they believed the spirit of the person would not be able to see where they were being taken for burial, and thus unable to find their way back home. If they had the time too, Vikings would build something really fun called a corpse door, an opening they built into a home which was bricked up, and when the burial was ready, would be smashed through, and the dead would be carried through this feet first. The belief was that the reanimated could only enter their home from the way they had left, so if there was no corpse door anymore, the draugr wouldn't be able to get in, and it would just sort of paw at the door like a sad cat. Honestly, the logic is there. This one makes complete sense to me. And number 1, the Dorset grave. The Dorset mass grave is one of the scariest and confusing archaeological discoveries ever discovered. Let me ask you, what's more fun than a barrel of monkeys? You might be thinking a barrel of Vikings? No, I'm thinking about a mass grave full of headless Viking bodies. No? Okay, well you and I find different things very fun, I suppose. Way back, all the way back in 2008, a group of archaeologists were on a fairly routine digging operation in Dorset, a quaint little seaside town in England. They were supervising a digging operation to improve local roads and were on set to see if there was anything of note to find. You know, maybe an old coin or an arrowhead. And for the first few days of the job, nothing noteworthy was really coming up until they came across the mass pile of 54 entangled Viking corpses, all missing their heads. I guess that was kind of noteworthy. If it was just a bunch of headless Viking bodies, that would be one thing, but the mass grave was just riddled in confusing details. Their skulls were missing, but as well, their rib cages, arm, and leg bones were all scattered around, surrounded by discarded teeth. There were no clothes or weaponry to be found at all. So what in Odin's name happened here, because absolutely nothing I can imagine is pleasant. My first thought is that this was some sort of insane Event Horizon-esque scenario where a bunch of Vikings opened up a portal to hell and had a blood party. The teeth found around the grave had all been filed down neatly as if a craftsman had done it. Now it goes without saying that, Viking dental surgery was not going to be a painless process, meaning this had to be excruciating, suggesting it was either done by a very careful tormentor, or it was done to themselves to intimidate opponents by showing how gritty and fierce they are. Could not tell you which one is better. Now, as good as my theory about a bunch of Vikings opening up a Hellraiser scenario or something is, archaeologists had some different ideas. They theorized that looking at the wounds on the ribs and the torso, that they were very surgical blows, which isn't really what you'd expect from a rabid Viking brawl. The archaeologists thought that these men were either offered up as part of a horrifying sadistic ritual, or it was a big-time mass sentencing where everybody was rounded up and sentenced to death. Explains too where all the weapons and gear had gone, as these men had been brought here and then left there for a very, very long time. Anyone else feel like that also kind of sounds like it might be the world's most terrifying puzzle to try and put together, trying to figure out where all those bones go? Maybe just me? Maybe I've been working on this channel too long and my sense of humor has been changed permanently. Number 5. The Pyramids and the Sphinx. Famed for giving out riddles to passers-by and would-be kings and keeping even more secrets for itself, the Sphinx and the Great Pyramids of Giza aren't just one of the best tourist destinations in the world, they're a source of never-ending speculation. Were they crafted by aliens? Are there hidden secrets lying within the Sphinx that we don't know about? Almost certainly. Let's dissect them a bit. So the Sphinx, if you haven't heard of it, this is your first time hearing about it. It's one of the 7 wonders of the world or something, but this might be the first time. It's a massive limestone statue with a lion's body, and let's be real, it's a nice one at that. And the head of a human. Was it always a human's face? There's some speculation and discussion about that. Some researchers have proposed that originally the Sphinx was a monument to the jackal god Anubis, and that his face was refitted at some point in the image of Anamet II, a pharaoh from around that era. Now the purpose and origin remains a point of contention to Egyptologists. What was the Sphinx built for? Is it a tomb? A monument? Just something to take photos of? Some people have even speculated that the Sphinx is older than Egypt even. A tomb? A monument? Just something to do? Researchers too have speculated that perhaps the Sphinx is older than Egypt even. Erosion pattern on the Sphinx's body appeared consistent with water erosion, rather than wind erosion, raising all sorts of questions about the climate and geological history. Did Egypt used to be like a lot wetter? And that's just what puzzles people on the outside. The inside of the thing is a whole other can of worms. Some propose that there are unexplored passages or secret chambers containing wondrous treasures, ancient texts, sacred artifacts. I think the Master Sword might even be in there. Some people think there's proof of extraterrestrial life. It's a very widespread conspiracy theory that aliens were involved in the Sphinx and the pyramids and are very closely tied to ancient Egyptian culture. Some limited excavations around the Sphinx have been carried out, but because of the delicate nature of the monument, further digging is a bit challenging. You don't want to be the guy who ruined one of the 7 wonders of the world. They're gonna make fun of you forever if that happens. We could do a whole video on the mysteries behind the Sphinx, and I sincerely hope we do, because we are just scratching the surface of strange stuff going on there. But if you're looking for way more strange stuff, then you already know we have that in spades. We've got just about everything freaky you can think of. We've done a video or 2 on it. So hit subscribe. Please hit that little bell as well so you make sure to get our videos up to date. Don't miss a single scream, but do that at the end of this video because I got 4 more unsolved mysteries for you coming up right now. Number 4, the Voynich manuscript. The manuscript is one of my personal favorite unsolved mysteries out there, just for how sheer little we know about it. We have nothing. It's kind of a choose your own adventure for mysteries. Is it aliens? Demons? A really convoluted historical prank? If you don't know, the Voynich manuscript is a strange document written in a handwritten text filled with bizarre illustrations. No one's been able to make sense of it, primarily because it's written in a language that has never been seen elsewhere in human history. It was named after Wilfrid Voynich, the Polish antiquarian who purchased it in 1912, although its ownership has passed through many hands. So what was it written for, and by who? These are the questions we've been asking, and we're probably going to keep asking over and over. The manuscript is about 240 pages, containing illustrations of plants, astronomical diagrams, humanoid figures, and other strange objects. Despite countless attempts by cryptographers, no one's been able to crack the code just yet. Some speculation has been made that it could be a biology textbook in an encoded language. Some people think it could be the scrawlings of a brilliant alchemist, magic and spell casting we couldn't possibly hope to understand. Some say it's from a forgotten civilization, while others have said maybe it's all just a load of nonsense and is just made by someone who had too much time on their hands and a vengeance against historians who wanted to prank them for centuries. The book is thought to have come from anywhere between the 15th century and the 17th century. We don't even know when this thing was written. Like I said, we know next to nothing about it. Now, if you're feeling clever and inspired, you can find a PDF of the Voynich manuscript as a free download pretty easily. Who knows? You might be the one to finally crack this case. But hey, don't be frustrated if you end up falling down a conspiracy rabbit hole many before you have tried. I looked through a few of these pages and it took me 30 seconds before I was looking like Charlie from Always Sunny at the conspiracy wall, all that red tape and stuff. Number 3, the Nidaros Cathedral. The Nidaros Cathedral is a popular tourist hotspot in Norway. Renowned for its beautiful architecture, it's a stunning monument to Norway's very rich history, and it's also quite known as one of the more haunted buildings in the entire country. It's located in the city center of Trondheim, named after the Trondheim Nidaros, which was the capital of Norway during the era of Vikings. In the early days, it was a humble, simple wooden chapel built to serve as the tomb of Saint Olaf, a Viking king who helped introduce Christianity to Viking culture and would be remembered as the patron saint of Norway. It was the traditional location for the consecration of new kings of Norway. Now, if you're looking at this and you think, wow, what a building, that's because it took 230 years to build it, so I would hope it looks great. From the years 1070 to 1300, it was worked on round the clock. Now let's get into the most important part, and the only part we even care about this building is the ghost. I just spent so much time talking about architectural history when we could be talking about a ghost. Norway's most famous ghost is known as the monk, and he's an apparition that manifests as a medieval monk with a bloody gash along its throat, dripping onto the floor. The monk's first sighting was in 1924, and since then has become a bit of a staple of the cathedral, with countless sightings and tourists reporting hearing, seeing, or feeling the monk around the cathedral. The first sighting was from a bishop's wife during service, and she claims that she saw the monk standing behind the congregation with bright glowing blue eyes. She said his face was sharp and glowing, and when he raised his hand hand that blood started to pour from his throat. The priest who was tending to the service at the time claims that while he was speaking, he felt an unspeakable pain in his throat, as if something was lodged in it. Number 2, the Bermuda Triangle. Ah, the Bermuda Triangle. Now there's an exquisite ancient mystery, one of the certified classics, something that's eluded us for years and will probably continue to do so. It's been referred to before as the Devil's Triangle, and it's host to all manner of mysterious incidents and unexplained phenomena. One of the more infamous incidents linked to the Bermuda Triangle is the disappearance of Flight 19 in December 1945. 5 Navy bombers vanished during a routine training mission alongside 14 crew members. Gone. Zilch. There was an extensive search effort, but nothing was ever found. Not so much as a bolt off the hull, a boot fished up, a hat, nothing. It was as if they were swallowed up by the void. Naturally, people went a bit wild with theories on this one. Anything from aliens, electromagnetic anomalies, alternate realities, no clipping into the back room. You know, pretty serious academic stuff. But it's bizarre. Another particularly good Bermuda baffler for you is the case of the USS Cyclops. In March 1918, the 542-foot long cargo ship carrying over 300 crew members vanished during its voyage from Barbados. No wreckage, no survivors ever found. Certainly you would think a ship that big with that many people would leave behind a little bit of evidence, right? What happened? Were they swallowed up by the very seas themselves, pulled to Davy Jones's locker by the Kraken? Or are they somewhere we can't reach them, in a place between worlds and time? The region is known for all sorts of weird stuff too, involving electronic malfunctions and compass deviations. It makes it seem like there is just something bad in the air out there. Maybe just bad vibes? Certainly seems that way. And number 1, the Dorset Mass Grave. Oh, this one is a doozy, and it is one of the scariest and most confusing archaeological discoveries ever found. Let me ask you, what's more fun than a barrel of monkeys? A barrel of Vikings? Well, how about a mass grave full of headless Viking bodies? No? Well, you and I find different things fun, I suppose. Way back in the yesteryear of 2008, a group of archaeologists were on a fairly routine digging operation in Dorset, a quaint little seaside town in England. They were supervising a digging operation to improve local roads and were on set to see if there was anything of note to find, you know, if they came across an old coin or an old arrowhead or something you could stuff in a museum case. For the first few days of the job, there wasn't anything particularly noteworthy discovered until they came across the mass pile of 54 entangled Viking corpses, all missing their heads. I guess they thought that was probably kind of interesting. If it was just a bunch of headless Viking bodies, that'd be one thing. But the mass grave was wrapped in confusing details. Their skulls were missing, but as well their rib cages, arms, and leg bones were all scattered around, this is disgusting, surrounded by discarded teeth. No clothes or weaponry was recovered. So what in the Allfather's name happened here? Because absolutely nothing I can imagine is pleasant. Sounds like Vikings opened up a portal to hell, went really wild with it. The teeth found around the grave had all been filed down neatly, which is very interesting. Now, it goes without saying that Viking dental surgery could not have been painless, meaning the process had to be excruciating, suggesting it was either done by a very careful tormentor or done to themselves to intimidate their opponents to show just how gritty they are. I actually don't know which of those two are preferable. They actually both sound pretty horrible. Now, as good as my theory about a bunch of Vikings opening up a portal to hell and being offered as a sacrifice is, archaeologists had some different ideas. They theorized that by looking at the wound patterns on the ribs and torso, they were surgical precise blows, which wasn't really the kind of thing you'd expect from a rabid Viking warrior flailing around a sword in a brawl. The archaeologists thought that these men were either offered up as part of a horrifyingly sadistic ritual, or it was a big time mass sentencing where everybody was sentenced to the death. Explains too where all the weapons and gear had gone. These men had been brought here from somewhere else and then left here for a long time. We might never know the truth behind the Dorset mass grave, and I'm gonna be honest, that might be fine with me. Some secrets are better left buried. Anyone else feel though that all those Viking skeletons, that might be like the world's most terrifying puzzle to put all that together? Morbid thought, and that's something to end the video on.
Coming in at number 5 is the Great Pyramid of Giza. As one of the 7 wonders of the world, the Great Pyramid of Giza is a highly visited historical landmark. Located in Egypt, the Great Pyramid of Giza was built roughly 4,000 years ago. It took nearly 30 years to build the 481-foot pyramid, and ever since its construction, it has captivated the world with its enigmatic aura and awe-inspiring size. However, beneath its extraordinary exterior lies a dark legend that has haunted historians for centuries, the dreaded Curse of the Pharaohs. This ancient curse stems from the belief held by ancient Egyptians that the entombed pharaohs should not be disturbed in their eternal slumber, protecting the deceased on their journey to the afterlife. Anyone dumb enough to disturb these pharaohs would be struck with the wrath of the gods, unleashing a terrible curse upon themselves and their companions. The most infamous story surrounding the curse of the pharaohs involves the tomb of Tutankhamun, discovered by British archaeologist Howard Carter and his team in 1922. After working day and night to open the tomb, Howard Carter would send a messenger to his home to run an errand. When the messenger got to his house, he found a cobra that had broken in, a symbol of the Egyptian monarchy. This omen that Carter received was the only warning that he and his team got. And spoiler alert, they didn't listen to it. The team continued to enter the tomb, unearthing an astonishing treasure trove of artifacts. Soon after Tutankhamun's tomb's opening, a series of mysterious and untimely deaths would occur among those involved in the expedition. The first to go was Lord Carnarvon, the financial backer of the excavation, who died suddenly after getting an infection from a mosquito bite. 6 months after Carnarvon's death, a lesion on Tutankhamun's left cheek was found to be healed. Whether this correlates with Carnarvon's fatal mosquito bite remains a mystery, as his body decomposed before the healed cheek was found. Over the years, numerous other accounts of misfortune and tragedy associated with the pyramid emerged, only adding to the curse's reputation and the fear surrounding it, such as George J. Gold, a visitor of the tomb who died of a fever he developed following his visit. There's also Henry Field, who received a scarab from the tomb from Howard Carter. The scarab was inscribed, "Cursed be he who moves my body. To him shall come fire, water, and pestilence." Shortly after, his house would burn down, and after it was rebuilt, it would then flood. The curse of the pharaohs remains a chilling tale that leaves a lingering sense of dread and unease. Every time we gaze upon the Great Pyramid of Giza, we are reminded that some doors are better left unopened, and that there are secrets in this world that may forever be shrouded in darkness. Anyway, coming in at number 4 is the cursed city of Akkad. The cursed city of Akkad was a bustling metropolis located within the heart of ancient Mesopotamia. It stood as the capital of the Akkadian Empire during the 24th and 23rd centuries BC. The origins of this curse are as mysterious as the city itself. According to ancient legend, the Akkadian king, Naram Sin, is said to have deeply angered the Mesopotamian god of wind, Enlil. He did this by plundering Enlil's temple and declaring himself a deity himself, which challenged the divine order. To punish Naram Sin, the gods unleashed a devastating curse upon the city of Akkad, sealing its fate in doom. The curse manifested itself through a series of unnatural and natural disasters: floods, famine, unending warfare, and of course, death. With the major city under so much duress from a mix of nature and war, the gods decreed that the city of Akkad be destroyed in order to spare whoever survived their wrath, and curse the ruins. Legends speak of wandering souls trapped within the ruins of Akkad, seeking revenge against any who dared to trespass their domain. The people who visited the ruins anyway would report hearing disembodied voices, cold chills, and the feeling that they were being watched by some unknown entity. To this day, historians and archaeologists alike recount tales of unexplained events happening to them and any who attempt to excavate or study the ruins of Akkad. Some have even gone so far to report ghostly figures walking among the ancient remains. The cursed city of Akkad serves as a chilling reminder of the greed of great rulers and how that greed often turns into hubris. Next up at number 3 is Australia's very own Ayers Rock, also known as Uluru. The curse of Uluru casts a mighty shadow of fear over this iconic sandstone monolith in Australia's vast outback. Rising majestically from the rugged desert landscape, Uluru holds sacred significance for the indigenous Australian peoples. According to Aboriginal beliefs, Uluru is a site that holds tremendous spiritual power and holds the essence of the ancestral beings who once walked the earth and shaped the land. The spirits that reside within the monument are said to be its guardians, and disturbing the site is believed to invoke a potent curse upon those who disrespect its sanctity. Tourists who venture too close to the rock, take photos of it, or even have taken rocks or soil as souvenirs have reportedly faced long runs of bad luck, misfortune, and a string of unfortunate incidents, all attributed to the wrath of these ancestral spirits. Tourists often regret stealing from the sacred location, going on long journeys to return stolen parts of Ayers Rock. The Uluru National Park's main office receives hundreds of packages containing contraband from the site, many containing notes claiming to have experienced great misfortune since taking the contraband. In response to the curse and deep cultural significance of the rock, the local Anangu people, traditional custodians of Uluru, officially banned the climbing of the landmark in 2019 to respect the cultural sensitivities of the site and to protect naive tourists unaware of the curse that could land upon them. Uluru's curse stands as a testament to the profound spiritual connection Australian Aboriginals have with their land, and teaches us that some places are best approached with caution and respect. So if you ever plan on going rock climbing, I'd recommend taking Ayers Rock off your list. Counting down to number 2 is the ancient Roman city of Pompeii. Pompeii, a city frozen in time. The catastrophic volcanic eruption on Mount Vesuvius in 79 AD. It holds a haunting tale of a curse that echoes through the ages. The city's ruins remain preserved by layers of volcanic ash, giving us a snapshot of the terror felt by its residents at the time of the eruption. The curse of Pompeii is intertwined with the city's tragic fate. According to ancient accounts and historical records, the people of Pompeii lived a life of indulgence and decadence, always turning a blind eye to any warning signs of their impending demise. It was this blind eye and disregard for the gods that are considered to be the origins of the curse that ultimately led to the devastating eruption. Legend states that as Mount Vesuvius erupted in a deadly fury, a haunting wail could be heard all across the land. Many go to say that this disturbing cry was manifested by the spirits of Pompeii's many citizens, forever trapped in a volcanic grave. Many archaeologists and researchers have ventured to the city's ruins, and many of which end up telling tales of strange accidents, illnesses, and encounters with the spirits of those entombed in ash. There are famous stories of adventurers who would steal pieces of ceramics and pottery, who would then return them to Pompeii because of the terrible misfortune that befell them. One woman reported seeing strange apparitions and hearing eerie voices at night. These shadowy figures would follow her around and make her life miserable until she would eventually return the stolen artifacts to the ashen city. Even today, tourists who wander the ruined streets of Pompeii will report hearing faint cries and whispers, the lingering echoes of a fallen civilization. And at the number 1 spot is none other than the Forbidden City in Beijing, China. A grand city located at the center of the imperial city of Beijing, the Forbidden City boasts a history that spans over 3,000 years. It acts as the most iconic landmark of ancient Beijing, with stunning architecture, and it is surrounded by numerous beautiful gardens and temples. However, the city's majesticism hides a dark, mysterious curse that has left even the most seasoned historians wary of its power. The Forbidden City was built during the Ming Dynasty. It served as an imperial palace for the Chinese emperors until the end of the Qing Dynasty. The Forbidden City acted as a central hub of political power and prestige. Its construction involved the toil of countless workers, and legends speak of their suppressed suffering, giving the city an unsettling aura. This would form the curse, and it is believed to stem from the torment endured by the laborers and the suffering inflicted upon those who worked on its construction. Their souls forever tethered to the palace seeking retribution for the unjust treatment. Throughout history, eerie tales of unexplained phenomena and bizarre occurrences have circulated among those brave enough to explore the Forbidden City. Stories range from ghost sightings to inexplicable cold spots that have chilled visitors to the bone, to hearing the wailing of tormented spirits reverberating across the city. One haunting story describes a weeping woman dressed in all white who would glide through the shadows of the city streets, her cries echoing across the many roads and alleyways. Another story tells of ominous flute music being heard after dark, coming from the city center. In the face of the Forbidden City's chilling reputation, many historians and researchers approach their work with fascination and great caution, as they are both allured by the idea of unlocking the city's dark secrets and fearful of its vengeful spirits and cursed aura. The Forbidden City remains a testament to China's rich heritage and the enduring spirit of its people, and acts as a lesson to not inflict such torment to those who build the beautiful cities that enchant and attract visitors from all around the world. And that's gonna be it.
Number 5 on this list is the Dancing Plague of 1518. That's right guys, you heard that right. A plague about dancing. Honestly, I'd never heard of this before, and in my whole time working on this channel, this is actually the coolest and strangest thing that I've ever come across. So in Strasbourg, Alsace, which is now modern day France, in the year 1518, from July all the way to September, People just started dancing. For months, hundreds of people were dancing in the streets of France, and they couldn't stop. It's said that one woman started dancing in the streets one day, and then some more came, and they just kept going for months with absolutely no reason at all. People started thinking that this was the cause of a demonic possession or some ghost that was making people lose their minds, but in actuality, nobody had any idea why these people were doing this. This wasn't a casual waltz either. These people were going hard. These people went so hard that they literally danced themselves to death. I can't possibly imagine going so hard at the club that I died, but that's basically what happened here with these people. There are actual claims that at one point in the heat of all this dancing, up to 15 people were dying per day just from dancing. This death kept happening, and these people would continue dancing around all of these bodies. This plague went on until September, when it just suddenly subsided, and that was that. No explanation, no reasoning behind it. They just went hard for several months and then stopped. That's why everyone thinks that something demonic has to be the cause of all this. Some people have speculated that food poisoning may have played some role, but that just doesn't make any sense to me because it went on for months. Seriously folks, please comment down below what you think about this or some theories about why this happened, because it has me pretty baffled. Number 4 on this list is the lost city of Atlantis. Atlantis is a city that is considered to be a utopian society in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. It was first documented by Plato in 2 of his works, Timaeus and Critias. Now even though Atlantis is often referred to as a city these days, back then Plato described it as an island. This island was located in the Atlantic and was said to be pretty massive, bigger than Asia Minor and Libya combined. This island, or city, was extremely wealthy and had a surplus of resources. This is what led them to being considered a utopia and a highly advanced group. Now Plato describes a great battle between these Atlanteans and the Athenians and says that after lots of hard fighting, the Athenians eventually prevailed in the war. Then several massive earthquakes caused the earth to shift, and the entire island of Atlantis was swallowed up by the sea and now rests at the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean somewhere. Many people have speculated on how accurate these tales from Plato are, with experts believing that this could just all be a myth. However, the legend of Atlantis started to circulate around Europe many years later, and people began searching for this lost city. Nobody has found it to this day, but that doesn't mean that it never existed. Maybe we're just thinking about it the wrong way. Some people have thought that this entire city of Atlantis could have been aliens coming down to Earth, and that potentially this island was never really an island to begin with. Plato does describe the society as being a utopia, and an explanation for that would be aliens that have far better technology than we do. Maybe when this island apparently disappeared, these aliens just left. Now that does beg the question, if they're so advanced, how on earth could the ancient Athenians beat them in a battle? Which I do think is a very fair point. I do believe that Plato and the people after him have exaggerated this story, and the full truth has probably been lost in history. But I also believe that this tale didn't just come out of nowhere, and something potentially paranormal could be at hand. Number 3 on this list is the Coral Castle. The Coral Castle is a limestone structure located in Florida. It is super unique and has these strange limestone rocks that have been carved into various figures. Now there's nothing inherently cursed about this place. However, similar to the pyramids or Stonehenge that we covered in our last video, people wonder how on earth this place was made. Edward Leeds Scallon was a self-taught Russian engineer who came to America. He lived from 1887 to 1951 and is credited with being the creator of the Coral Castle. What's absolutely crazy about this story though, is he constructed this structure all by himself. This is what baffles people to this day. How on earth is it possible that one man in the early 1900s was capable of moving these limestones and carving them the way that they are single-handedly? These stones weigh thousands of pounds, and there's no way that a man would ever be able to lift these things with sheer strength. Now, he was an engineer, and people have speculated that it was potentially the use of magnetism, something that he was fascinated with in his life. When asked how he was able to do this, he replied, "I understand the laws of weight and leverage, and I know the secrets of the people who built the pyramids." This kind of makes sense, but with the pyramids, they had thousands of people working on them all at once. You were only one man. People have theorized that Edward actually had some supernatural abilities that he was hiding from the public. This could honestly be believable because his personality was apparently extremely eccentric and very strange. However Edward was able to construct the Coral Castle, It truly is remarkable. Number 2 on this list is the oldest ghost story of all time. Ever wonder when all this started? When did humans start believing in ghosts, or when did we have our first encounter with a poltergeist? Well, a 3,500-year-old tablet may have the earliest depiction of a ghost as we know them today. This is a small tablet that was made in ancient Babylon and is considered by some experts to be one of the first, if not the first, written depiction of a ghost. The ghostly drawings could be easily missed, and you have to really pay attention if you're going to see it. An expert on the subject, Irvin Finkel, says, "You'd probably never give it a second thought because the area where the drawings are looks like it's got no writing, but when you examine it and hold it under a lamp, those figures leap out at you across time in the most startling way." The tablet goes into detail on how to get rid of ghosts and calls for an exorcist. It explains how this exorcist must make figurines of a man and a woman, and also speak the words of Mesopotamian god Shemesh to get rid of the ghost. There's also a warning to the reader to not turn around, potentially an indicator that a ghost could be behind you, or you could risk getting sucked into the underworld if your focus isn't steady. This tablet also lists a bunch of materials that can be used in rituals and that can be used to prevent ghosts from appearing in the first place. This is super interesting because it means that ghosts and spirits visiting the living can be traced all the way back to the ancient Mesopotamians. We were having paranormal events happen to us thousands of years ago, and the action of exorcising demons and ghosts, it all started with these guys. One could argue that they were the founders and innovators of a lot of our ghostly practices and knowledge to this day. Number 1 on this list is Oak Island. Oak Island is a very mysterious island that has been shrouded in lore for years. It's a privately owned island off the south shore of Nova Scotia, Canada. It has so many rumors surrounding it that it's even got its own television show called The Curse of Oak Island that has 8 seasons under its belt. This is a reality television show by the History Channel where they explore the mysteries of Oak Island, and considering they're on season 8, it's fair to say that there have been quite a few mysteries. The one that's gained the most international fame, though, is the Money Pit. The Money Pit is supposedly a place on Oak Island where there's a plethora of buried treasure waiting for somebody to dig it up. This treasure was left by the pirate Captain William Kidd, who lived from 1645 to 1701. There's said to be vast riches here, however no one's been able to find it up until this point. This is largely because finding buried treasure can be extremely difficult, but also due to the curse that surrounds it. The curse that hovers over this treasure states that 7 men will die in search of the treasure before it's found. To this day, there have actually been 6 deaths associated with this buried treasure. That means that if one more person was to die whilst they're looking for it, then the treasure would either reveal itself, or the next person who goes looking for it would be the one who finds it. Problem with this is that there's one more person who needs to die, and I don't think that anyone wants to be that unlucky number 7. Other than this pirate treasure, there's also rumored to be some extremely valuable and mystical items here. Never before seen Shakespearean plays, the Holy Grail, and the Ark of the Covenant have all been linked to Oak Island. If searching for cursed treasure is your cup of tea, and this is definitely the place for you. Well, there you have it, guys. That is our list of the top 5 paranormal events that took place during ancient history, part 2. Please comment down below what you thought about these entries. And speaking of comments, I do want to give a few shoutouts from y'all from the last video. Chris Nunn commented, "I watched a documentary about Stonehenge. They said if they had enough people, they could move the stones to the site. Who knows?" I wasn't aware of that, man. Like, you'll need to link me with the documentary that you were watching, but that's very interesting because these stones could be typically up to like 50,000 pounds, so I don't know how many people they had, but clearly it would have been a lot. Also, Beezer said, "I like Nick, he's a great addition to the channel," to which I say, thank you so much, my friend. You are a great addition to the comments. I appreciate you, and you're awesome. Anyways, guys, please hit the like and subscribe button. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you next time.